Hey everyone, it's Naomi Wolf here with Daily Clout. I'm reporting from Edinburgh. Um, I'm here at the Edinburgh Book Festival, and today we're talking about HR 8, which was stalled in February. It's a bipartisan bill that a lot of people would say is a really, really reasonable gun bill. And in the wake of horrible massacres, 2 mass shootings in a week, it does seem important to look at bipartisan legislation that was introduced, and has supporters on both sides of the aisle, but that for reasons that you need to think about has not been able to get out of the House. So here's HR 8. It's the 116th Congress. It was received and read for the first time in February, as I mentioned. It was read the second time and put on the calendar on March 4th of this year, and it's a super simple act. I really want to hear what you think about this, because it's so, we're nonpartisan, but this is so uncontroversial. An act to require a background check for every firearms sale. Be it enacted by the Senate and House of Representatives of the United States of America and Congress assembled. Section 1, short title. This act may be cited as the Bipartisan Background Checks Act of 2019. So right there, you hear that it's bipartisan, meaning it's, an effort to not play politics. Section 2, purpose. The purpose of this act is to utilize the current background checks process in the United States to ensure individuals prohibited from gun possession are not able to obtain firearms. So think about that. It's basically saying this is supposed to make sure that people who are already forbidden to own guns are not able to get guns. It's not creating new prohibitions. It's just making sure that the law is actually enforced for people who are already not legally allowed to own guns. Section 3, firearms transfers. It amends Section 922 of Title 18 in 3 ways, and then it says that you want to insert the following. It shall be unlawful for any person who's not a licensed importer, licensed manufacturer, licensed dealer to transfer a firearm to any other person who is not so licensed, unless a licensed importer, licensed manufacturer, or licensed dealer has first taken possession of the firearm for the purpose of complying with subsection S. That's the first clause. The second is, upon taking possession of a firearm under subparagraph A, a licensee shall comply with all requirements of this chapter as if the licensee were transferring the firearm from the inventory of the licensee to the unlicensed transferee. C, if a transfer of a firearm described in subparagraph A will not be completed for any reason after a licensee takes possession of the firearm, including because the transfer of the firearm to or receipt of the firearm by the transferee would violate this chapter, the return of the firearm to the transferee by the licensee shall not constitute the transfer of a firearm for purposes of this chapter. So what I think that means, sorry, I'm in a hotel, so you may be able to hear a little sound out in the hallway. What that's basically saying is that you can't sell a firearm to someone who is not licensed to receive it. All right. Paragraph 1 shall not apply to A, a law enforcement agency or any law enforcement officer, armed private security professional, or member of the armed forces, to the extent the officer, professional, or member is acting within the course and scope of employment and official duties. They can have guns. B, a transfer that is a loan or bona fide gift between spouses, between domestic partners, between parents and their children, including step-parents and their stepchildren, between siblings, between aunts or uncles and their nieces or nephews, or between grandparents and their grandchildren, if the transfer has no reason to believe that the transferee will use or intends to use a firearm in a crime, or is prohibited from possessing firearms under state or federal law. So that clause is seeking to make this a common sense law, and to basically say, okay, If you're an arms dealer or a gun seller, you can't transfer it to someone who's not licensed to receive it. However, if you're a parent who wants to give a child a hunting rifle, or if you are living with your partner and you want to give your wife or husband the gun when you're on it, when you're on a business trip, or if you want to give your grandchild a gun, you're allowed to do that. So this is why I love bipartisan legislation. Democrats would never think of that, but Republicans, who are more familiar with people who actually own guns, are really thinking in this bill, what is a common sense carve out for this prohibition that you shouldn't sell a gun to someone who's not licensed to have it? Well, you should be able to give I was just at dinner. I'm in Scotland, so this is sort of different, but you can imagine a similar situation in the United States. I was at dinner with people who hunt deer, and they all learned to hunt when they were teenagers. In Britain, when these people were growing up, teenagers could have hunting licenses. And you wouldn't want a law to say a parent can't give a teenage child a hunting rifle if they're hunting deer on their own property or hunting recreationally. So this is that common sense carve out in the United States saying, you know what, if you're a parent, if you're a grandparent, if you're an aunt or uncle, let's keep it, not cumbersome. C, a transfer to an executor, administrator, trustee, or personal representative of an estate or trust that occurs by operation of law upon the death of another person. So that's saying, you don't have to do something cumbersome or get a license if your grandfather has passed away and left you his rifle or his gun. D, a temporary transfer that is necessary to prevent imminent death or great bodily harm, including harm to self, family, household members, or others, if the possession by the transferee lasts only as long as immediately necessary to prevent the imminent death or great bodily harm, including the harm of domestic violence, dating partner violence, sexual assault, stalking, and domestic abuse. So that's basically saying, okay, God forbid you're in a school where there's an active shooter, you're a teacher, someone who is licensed to carry a gun, a police officer, a security guard has been shot dead, but the shooter is coming up the stairs. You're allowed to grab that gun, even though you don't have a license, and use it to defend the children in kindergarten. So that's basically making sure that people who are in imminent danger or who are engaged in self-defense or who are trying to protect someone who's being fatally attacked by an assailant doesn't then get charged with a crime for grabbing the gun that they're not licensed to use to defend that person. A transfer that's approved by the Attorney General under Section 5812 of the Internal Revenue Code, or a temporary transfer if the transferor has no reason to believe that the transferee will use or intends to use the firearm in a crime or is prohibited from possessing firearms under state or federal law, and the transfer takes place and the transferee's possession of the firearm is exclusively, 1, at a shooting range or in a shooting gallery or other area designated for the purpose of target shooting. So that's basically saying, if you're teaching someone to shoot, like my brother, believe it or not, taught me to shoot a gun briefly when we were, many years ago. You can do that if you're in a shooting range. You don't need to get a license for the person you're teaching to shoot if you're in a shooting range. 2, while reasonably necessary for the purposes of hunting, trapping, or fishing, if the transfer Sub 1 has no reason to believe that the transferee intends to use the firearm in a place where it's illegal, and 2, has reason to believe that the transferee will comply with all licensing and permit requirements for such hunting, trapping, or fishing, or 3, while in the presence of the transfer. So that's another common sense carve out by people who actually own guns. It's basically saying, if you're hunting and one person has a gun and the other one doesn't, you can lend your gun to that person to shoot the squirrel, without making that person go through the process of applying for a license to transfer that gun. You're allowed to kind of lend your gun under those circumstances. It's not to commit a crime. You're trapping, you're fishing, you're in the wilderness, or you can lend the gun if the person whose gun it is standing right next to you. So again, that's not something that gun control advocates would ever think about. They just want to get rid of all guns. But a lot of people who handle guns for hunting or for self-defense, responsibly handle guns, would see that as a really sensible carve out. 3A, notwithstanding any other provision of this chapter, the Attorney General may implement this subsection with regulations. B, regulations promulgated under this paragraph may not include any provision requiring licenses to facilitate transfers in accordance with paragraph 1. Regulations may not include any provision requiring licenses. So it's basically saying there can't be exceptions to this. C, regulations promulgated under this paragraph may not include any provision requiring persons not licensed under this chapter to keep records of background checks or firearm transfers. So it's basically saying if you lend your gun to your nephew when you're on a hunting trip to shoot a squirrel, you are not obligated to keep a record of background checks on your nephew. Regulations promulgated under this paragraph may not include any provision placing a cap on the fee licensees may charge to facilitate transfers in accordance with paragraph 1. You're allowed to charge what you want when you are transferring your gun to someone in a shooting range who is shooting at targets. E, regulations promulgated under this paragraph shall include, in the case of a background check conducted by the National Instant Criminal Background Check System in response to a contact from a licensed importer, licensed manufacturer, or licensed dealer, which background check indicates that the receipt of a firearm by a person would violate subsection G5, a requirement that the system notify U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. So this says that there's a national instant criminal background check system, and a licensed importer is going to notify that system if a person receives a gun in a way that violates the law. So that's a pretty straightforward background check caveat. The reason to have a background check is to alert law enforcement, in this case, U.S. Immigration Customs Enforcement, that someone who shouldn't have a gun has a gun. So it basically says if someone violates the background check, law enforcement gets notified. 4, it shall be unlawful for a licensed importer, licensed manufacturer, licensed dealer to transfer possession of or title to a firearm to another person who is not so licensed. So no one can a criminal cannot just buy a gun on the open market unless the importer, manufacturer, or dealer has provided such other person with a notice of the prohibition under paragraph 1, and such other person has certified that such other person has been provided with this notice on a form prescribed by the Attorney General. So people have to people who are seeking to buy guns have to be notified that if they are buying a gun illegally, it's going to alert law enforcement. And that's a big deal. It means that people who really can't legally buy guns because they're criminals or there's some other reason they shouldn't have a gun, right? They will know before they purchase a firearm that it's going to alert law enforcement. So that's a deterrent, to people who shouldn't own guns, owning guns. It's teeth, right? That's a clause that puts teeth in this. It's not empty language. It shall be unlawful. Okay, we did that. Section 4, technical and conforming amendments, just legal language. Then rule of construction, nothing in this act or any amendment made by this act shall be construed to, 1, authorize the establishment directly or indirectly of a national firearms registry. That's really important. People who own guns don't want to have a national firearms registry. They find that too intrusive. People who do want to ban guns, of course, think there's nothing wrong with it. But Second Amendment advocates really are vehement that they don't want a national firearms registry. And they cite history. They say that when tyrants crack down on populations, they take away their guns. And there is truth to that. I mean, a lot of nations historically that were taken over by tyrants, totalitarian or fascist tyrants, do disarm populations. That is true. I hate guns, but I know history, and that is absolutely true. Um, so this reassures, I mean, this is a truly bipartisan bill. It reassures people who own guns, people who are Second Amendment advocates, that there will not be a national firearms registry, or nothing in this act shall be construed to interfere with the authority of a state under Section 927 of Title 18 U.S. Code to enact a law on the same subject matter as this act. So basically, it's saying that states have the right to make up their own minds about how they're going to regulate guns. That this federal law or bill, not yet a law, doesn't interfere with a state's authority to make up their own minds about this. Effective date, it shall be effective 210 days after the enactment of this act, and it passed the House, as I said, February 27th, 2019. So it has not passed the House. It has not passed the Senate. That's the whole bill. That's the bipartisan gun bill. I'd love to know what you think. I have to say, it's kind of confusingly worded, but you got the gist of it. To recap, it reassures gun owners that there is not going to be a federal database, a gun registry database. It does not allow people to get licenses to own a gun if they are forbidden to own a gun. It makes sure that people who are criminals or who are in some other way prevented from owning guns get notified that law enforcement will get an alert if they buy a gun. And it forbids gun licensors and importers from basically selling it to anyone. However, it allows people who have guns to lend them to a colleague when they're hunting, trapping, or fishing. It lets you hand over your gun to someone in a shooting range. It lets you defend yourself. It lets you lend a gun to someone else to defend themselves in an imminently dangerous situation. And it lets you give guns to your spouse, your nieces, your nephews, your grandchildren. So to me, again, we're nonpartisan. This seems like a pretty commonsensical bill. It would prohibit it would certainly prevent and deter a lot of the black market in guns, while at the same time avoiding what gun owners really want to avoid, which is a national registry. To me, it's got common sense carve-outs. And to me, it respects the rights of responsible gun ownership while taking a step to manage the crazy flow of unregistered guns into the hands of criminals. I don't know what you think. This is H.R. 8. The real question is, why is the Senate opposing this so vociferously? And we'll write a blog about that. But it has not managed to pass the Senate, and a lot of Americans may be asking why. Do you think this is a good bill? Do you think it's a bad bill? Do you want to see clauses in there that are not there? Do you want to strike clauses that are there? This is Daily Clout. You can do that. But we'll give you more detail about where the H.R. 8, the bipartisan gun bill, is at and how you can move it forward if you want to move it forward, or stop it if you want to stop it. And, share this, because it's to me it's pretty shocking that we keep having gun massacre after gun massacre, and here's a bipartisan bill that people have taken the initiative to craft that seems so straightforward and commonsensical from a lot of perspectives, but that can't pass the House. Love to hear your thoughts. This is Naomi Wolf for Daily Cloud.